What are the complications of having a high body count? Hey guys, welcome back to another video. And in the modern world, so many people talk about body count. And simultaneously, high body counts are often, debated, scrutinized, talked over, or talked about. What is a high body count? How does the people that someone sleeps with, whether it's a man or a woman, how does it affect them? The more people they sleep with. And first, I would like to define what a high body count is, or what a body count is just in the first place. So a body count is just how many people a man or a woman sleeps with. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And which kind of gets into the point, what is a high body count then? Okay, so according to the New York Post, the perfect number for men is either 4 to 5 people. So in other words, a perfect body count for a man is either 4 or 5. For women, though, the perfect number is only 2 to 3 people, or 2 to 3 partners. And so what this means is then any number that's higher than 5 for men would be considered a high body count. And any number that's over 3, in other words, 3 people, would be a high body count for women. And then which kind of gets in the point, what is the complications of having a high body count? And so according to a kind of a blog, it's named Pulse NG, people who have had several sexual partners before getting married reported higher divorce rates, which is consistent with a pattern, even if there's no linear relationship between the number of premarital sex partners and the divorce rates. So basically, even if there's no direct relationship, the pattern still follows this trend of people who have more than 5. People who have a body count that's higher than 5 are associated with an increased level of divorce, increased divorce rates. And to add on to this, women who marry as virgins seem to have much fewer divorce rates, or much lower. Excuse me. And while the source Pulse suggests that this could be the case, due to the fact that some religions discourage sex before marriage, especially with the Christian faith, premarital sex is a sin. The reason why women who marry as virgins have much lower divorce rates isn't really clear. Furthermore, according to the National Survey of Gender, which has a pretty large sample size, just to note that, found that almost all women who had one partner, or who only had, who had a body count of 1, that were married by, 40, ended up being 95%. And their husband was likely that partner. So basically, women who married when they had a body count of 1 or 0, 95% of them were still married at the age of 40. So basically, they still had, in other words, they still maintain a long-term relationship. However, for women who had a body count of 2, This percentage decreased from 95% to 89%. However, women who never had sex was 87%. So correction. Women who had a body count of 1 was 95%. Women who had a body count of 2 was 89%. Women who didn't have a body count at all was 87%. Just want to correct that. Which is similar to the women that had a body count of 2. However, for women that had, more than 5 partners, in other words, had a body count of 5, their chances of getting married by the age of 40 dropped pretty significantly. For example, women who had 6 to 9 partners, or, in other words, body count of 6 to 9 people, only 76% of them were married by the age of 40. So, it dropped, 11% just by sleeping with, 4 extra people, 4 extra people. And then oh my goodness, my allergies are terrible. For women who have a body count of 10 or higher, this drops again even further to 67%. So it was only 2/3 of women who had a body count of 10 or higher were still married by the age of 40. And this also correlates with men, as the more people that men slept with, their satisfaction with marriage, or their satisfaction in whether it's being married or in being in a relationship, a long-term one, dropped the more people he slept with. This doesn't even mention the fact that the more people someone sleeps with can easily increase their risk of contracting a sexually transmitted infection, also known as an STI, or dealing with some other health issues that are pretty nasty. For example, according to the English Longitudinal Study of Aging, having several sexual partners increases their odds of getting STIs such as hepatitis B, hepatitis C, or HIV, which is, just the early stages of AIDS, which can very well, easily leave a negative impact on someone's health later in their life. Further, this doesn't even mention that having 10 or more sexual partners in someone's life increases their chance of getting cancer, as well as contracting HPV, which can also cause a variety of cancers. And so, according to a study published by BMJ Sexual and Reproductive Health, in the study they enrolled about 2,500 men and 3,200 women who are either 50 or over the age of 50. Each person was surveyed about the total number of sexual partners that they had over the course of their lives. And so the information was compared to a number of medical conditions that they developed over the course of their life, including cancer, heart disease, and stroke. And so the study found that men who reported 10 or more sexual partners were nearly 70% more likely to have developed cancer when compared with those reporting 0 or 1 lifetime sexual partners. Now, I want to clarify, I'm not saying that a higher body count guarantees that you're going to get cancer, but I find it interesting that the higher the body count that someone has, and this is for women too, because they found that for women it increased. Actually, it was for women who had a body count of 10 or more, were 90% more likely to have developed cancer. So it's for men and women. But I just find it interesting that the more someone slept with, basically the more likely they were, or the increased odds, not odds, but the increased frequency that they had of contracting, very nasty diseases such as HPV, cancer, and, other STIs. Just some food for thought for sure. And so ultimately, you're probably asking, what is the takeaway of this video? Yes, I understand. There's always issues with sleeping with more people, between the STIs and the other nasty health issues you can get. And it's also, you have a increased lack of satisfaction because you haven't found the one you want, and you keep, you're getting the pleasure of the moment, but you're not really getting the relationship you want to have. And so the takeaway of this video is to ultimately seek meaningful relationships that aren't propped up by how someone looks. Looks aren't everything. Don't get me wrong. If someone's good looking, for the ladies, if a guy's good looking and he's jacked, cool. But if he's got those two things and he has a good personality, perfect. And then for the guys, if she's cute, cool. But if she's cute and she has a good personality, that's the cherry on top. But it's not just about the looks, because people could be really good looking and then have a terrible personality, or they could just be an absolute mean, horrible person. It doesn't matter that, freaking, yeah, whatever. I'm not gonna get into that, but second point, don't expect to have a faithful spouse if you are not faithful yourself. That goes for both genders, men and women. Ultimately, doing that would be hypocritical and unfair to your spouse, not to mention that you're asking for a rift or a disconnect to be created between the both of you. And lastly, if you want to avoid contracting STIs or possibly reduce your risk of getting cancer, probably a good idea to be careful of how many partners you sleep with. And then obviously, that's between you and the partner, whether whatever your sexual orientation is, or whether you're a man or woman, doesn't really matter. And just communication. It's really what matters. But anyways, that'll do it for this video. And if this video resonated with any of you guys, or any of the ladies, feel free to give it a like, or throw a comment in the comment section down below, or subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys. Thank you for your time. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care.